The following podcast contains some strong language and some very average opinions.
Any references to actual people are wildly inaccurate. It's probably best if you don't listen at all. The Roaring Peacock Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Roaring Peacock Youth Podcast. This is a special edition. This is going to be with your normal podcast that you get every week from us. This is going to be a special interview with the Yorkshire Evening Post, Joe Gelhardt. So I'm your host, Ross. With me, as ever, is Cookie.
Hello.
Rob's here as well.
Good evening, chaps.
And our special guest, Joe. Welcome.
Good evening.
To ask, by the way, Ross, before we get going, did you research how to say that surname? Joe, I don't know how you say it, but I get it wrong every time, no matter how hard I fucking try, and I'm sure you hear that all the time.
Give it a go.
I just want to say, like, Urquhart, and it's obviously
That's actually right, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Fucking get in.
You've been practicing that, don't lie to
I
us.
fucking haven't.
Yeah. It's been sat in the mirror all day, hasn't he?
Yeah, rehearsing. That's what the ring light's out for, to hide the sweat beads from saying it wrong.
I tell you what, mate, my wife's done my makeup tonight. She hasn't done a very good job.
Let's crack straight in then, Joe. So you cover a lot of the under-23 football stuff for the YUP and also on Twitter, which is great to follow for people that aren't kind of watching the games. If you just follow your tweets, it's very helpful. Kind of how did you get into following that side of the club?
So when I joined the Evening Post, 3 years ago this month, there was sort of a gap really in the coverage that the paper was doing under 23s. So I kind of just stuck my hand up when I joined. It was part of sort of what I suppose sold in the interview was a gap in coverage that I noticed, and yeah, so I just thought there was like you three know, and like whoever's listening to this knows, there's a starvation for Leeds United, no matter what level of football it is. So basically just spotted the gap really, looked at it, and it was sort of coincided with the time that they were starting to win under Corberan when I joined, because obviously they'd had a real influx the summer before of sort of talent from across Europe because of the way that the squad had been decimated initially. And then they had, people like Sam Dalby, who are no longer there, but were sort of hitting form in front of goal and people like that, really. And yeah, so it was a good time for me to join, and I think they ended up going on a good sort of unbeaten run. Ended the season well, unlike the first team under Hecken. Yeah. So it was actually quite a good time to sort of latch onto it, because there was an added interest, because there was not really, the first team weren't doing that well, so people were looking to the academy for sort of some shining light, I guess. So that was sort of the way it all kicked off, and ended up just sort of continuing that on really. And here we are 3 years later, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah, Premier League.
Don't know if you sound happy about that. I thought I'd been promoted by now.
Well, to be fair, obviously we've had Phil and then Graham as chief football writer, but the first time Graham went to cover the under-23s in my absence, I think they got beat 7-0 by Derby. So I said to him, doing it again. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, right, I'll just suck it up and do it from now on, because clearly you're a bad omen.
Yeah. And how did you get into journalism? Like, how did you end up in this world?
It's a good question. I haven't really thought about it. I mean,
fell into it.
Yeah, well, to be honest, there is a bit of imposter syndrome. Like, I do look at myself and go, like, how the heck has this happened? What are you doing? And sometimes I'm sat writing things, and I'm like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. What am I? That kind of thing. But I went to university, like a lot of people, with the hopes of studying sports journalism. So I did that at Leeds Trinity, from Leeds initially, as you can probably all tell from my tweets. Still very biased, but who cares? It's local journalism.
All good with us, mate. All good with us.
If you can't be biased in local journalism, then you can't be biased in journalism, can you? So, I went to Leeds Trinity, studied for 3 years there, did all the things that students do, went out in town, partied, etc., etc. But somehow managed to come out with a degree, exited uni. Sorry, I'm trying to rapidly.
That's right.
I don't want to bore you all to death, because this is literally the first time I've ever spoken about myself. It's really weird. You're always asking questions. But so I graduated from uni and was sort of freelancing for people like Sky Sports, Fox Soccer in America, like obviously with the time difference, I was basically running the website when they were asleep, which was probably the best for everyone involved. And then I was sort of finding I wasn't really getting interviews. So I looked to try and volunteer as a lot of people do coming out of uni at sort of local clubs like Guiseley, Harrogate, but everyone was sort of filled. And there was an opportunity for me to move up to Scotland for sort of like 6-7 months with family. This is we're talking start of 2016. So I moved up there and weirdly joined a Scottish Football League 2 side, East Fife, which is why people see me tweeting about East Fife every now and then and go, what the heck are you on about? So basically, long story short, joined them as like media officer. They had nothing in place. They had no structure. They didn't, games were going on and they weren't tweeting, for example. The match reports weren't going on. They would play on Saturday at 3:00 and the match reports wouldn't go on till like Monday morning. It was so basically went in there, wrote for the programme, did all that stuff. And the manager at the time, people might remember, it was Gary Naismith, used to play for Everton. Was at Sheffield United for a bit, Scotland international. So he was the manager, and he was sort of welcoming to like the coverage because there was basically none at the time. There was only the paper, and that was a weekly paper up there, East Fife Mail. So did that, and long story short, I joined and they were 5th and ended up winning the league, which was like an incredible story to cover because obviously. For my first it was on a volunteer basis and it was only really part-time, but for it to sort of unfold like that, like an achievement for a football club, where they've only won I think it's 3 or 4 divisions in their history. I just kind of picked the 6-7 months to be there when they won the division, which was pretty crazy, but they had a really good team. They had Kevin Smith, who was actually in the Leeds United Academy at one point with like Aaron Lennon and people like that.
Oh, wow.
I may very vaguely remember him, but he was sort of under Lucy Ward's stewardship because he'd moved down from Scotland, and so that was good fun. Basically finished there, long story short, and then got a job with a golf magazine based in Leeds, which was a bit of a left field turn, but it was a way to get into journalism for me, just on a full-time basis, getting paid to write about sport, really. I like my golf, it's in my sort of top 5 sports, so I was more than happy. Did that for a couple of years, and then I guess got lucky and got the job at the Evening Post. Basically, that's
nice.
I mean, I'm still a bit baffled at how I'm.
Mate,
to be honest, so
I'm not going to lie, mate. You sound like you're a good omen. You were with that team when they wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
You've joined Leeds, and Bielsa's come along. We've won the championship. We're now flying. I mean, thank you.
Under 23s might win PL2 as well, so you can keep writing, mate.
Yeah, well, they did. I mean, they won in the first full season. They won the Professional Development League as well, didn't they?
Yeah.
So that was, but yeah, to be honest, I thought my luck had run out when Leeds got beat against Derby in the playoffs. I thought it's all downhill from here now. So, but it's been a pretty good ride so far, to be fair.
Yeah, nice. Make sure you add all those to your CV as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to hear your story into journalism versus. Do you know Tom Hill, the under-23 commentator we had on the other week?
Yeah, I do know Tom.
And his story of getting into commentary, which was to write into Leeds to say that people were pronouncing the names wrong, and ended up as a commentator. So you took a proper route and he winged it. No offence, Tom.
Yeah, no, if Tom's listening, absolutely. He did not. He doesn't deserve that job for a start. So, no, Tom's a great guy. He does a fantastic job, and to be fair, it's no mean feat trying to commentate on your own on 23's games sometimes, which happens on a Monday afternoon. So, fortunate to him for that, because I'd sit there and I'd just panic. Obviously, he knows his stuff and he does really well, but yeah. No, well, I think anyone takes on that, just take your chances, I guess. And, if you want to throw a Hail Mary pass, you go for it and send that letter or email or whatever and see what happens. Because unless you go out and sort of try and earn it, it's quite a hard industry to sort of get into.
Yeah, it's exactly what he said. And he was top notch on here, wanted lads. So
it was. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's his fault you're here in many ways because he recommended talking to, even though I think all of us pretty much follow you on Twitter anyway as part of the Leeds United blue tick element.
He dropped me a text and just said, I've landed you in it. I was like, oh, here we go. And now here we are. So.
With these unprofessional jokers.
Spending your Friday evening with us.
I think one question, well, I've got a 2-part question really, and I wanted to sort of pick your brains on it because we've been syndicating this just for 5 weeks now, and we've seen, obviously, we've been wanting to do it since the start of the season, but for various reasons it was delayed. And we've seen a real appetite for content. People want to talk about the under-23s. This podcast specifically focuses on the youth development across the younger squads. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what about that step up in interest or that ramp up in kind of a kind of appetite for content have you seen personally from either in the Yorkshire Evening Post or through your private Twitter account? Where are you seeing people lean towards? Is it people wanting to know more about player profiles? Is it people wanting to understand when the fixtures are, how to attend games? Maybe obviously not with COVID, but what are you finding about that element that's changed since the Bielsa's come in? And then I guess I've got a follow-up question about legacy as well, which I can ask you after.
Yeah, I think since Marcelo came in, there's been a huge interest just because of the way that he treats the under-23s, with the fact that there is a genuine pathway there. People, if they play well, if they train well, will get, a shot, whether it's in first team training. We might not see that, but and you'll see first team players drop down on a regular basis. And there are a lot of academies up and down the country that don't treat their under-23 side like that. They're sort of just there to fill space. They have players there on sort of yearly contracts that are just sort of floating from club to club. But it's as close as you'll get to a reserve team, isn't it, for Marcelo? And that's why it's so good to watch, because there is a genuine interest. Because I remember I think it was when Patrick Bamford came back from his knee injury, initially in the Championship. I think it was 2 seasons ago now. Playing up at Newcastle, and Izzy Brown was playing as well, and the club weren't streaming it. And I was doing it was a Friday night, I think, and it was freezing cold. And it was one of those where you sat there and waiting for the team sheet and thinking, why am I doing this? I've driven 2 hours on a Friday night to cover the academy. See the team sheet, it's suddenly like, this is why Patrick Bamford's playing, Izzy Brown playing. And then you look at the sort of website and the blog, and it must have been like nearly 30,000 hits that night just on the blog. And I was like, wow, fans are mental, But they just want to know how Patrick Bamford's recovering. But also, there's a lot of thirst for the fact that, all right, there's a lot of people going to that blog for Patrick Bamford, but then there's as many people wanting to know who Niall Huggins is at the same time, because does he have a chance of coming through? So there's just that starvation. And I think the fact that, Leeds has a really good history of bringing players through, that there's always going to be that sort of, who's the next big star, where are they coming from, what position at first team level needs filling, have we got anyone coming through at Thorpe Arch that might be able to sort of help, I listened to your podcast last week and you talk about sort of Cody Drammy being a long-term successor to Luke Ayling, and that's exactly what people want to know. Is this lad the genuine thing? Is he going to be able to do it? Leeds have tied him down to a decent contract, so people want to know if he's got the ability, because, in professional football, people like to try and protect youngsters, but at the same time, it's an unforgiving place. They need to start proving themselves straight away. That's how it is. So, I think initially, to go back to your question, because I've harped on a little bit, but I think the player profiles are massive for us. People want to know who they are, where they're coming from, what position they play, and especially under Bielsa, because everyone has to play 2 positions. There's like Greenwood at the moment's going through that phase of learning to play as an attacking midfielder or a number 10, maybe even a little bit deeper at times. So people want to know which positions they can play, who they are, where they've come from, etc., etc.
Yeah, especially when they're signing for 7 figures these days, gives even more interest, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the accessibility is also critical. We were picking Tom's brains about that. Not to mention Tom again, but he with the LUTV stuff, because I was watching. Normally, I just stream via the app, and I'm kind of looking at the game and watching like a fan, like we all are, and kind of making some notes for this weekly podcast to look at the players, who can we profile, what's going on, how we're playing, who's performing. And we've spoke about that versatility in the broadcasting, because you've got the Twitter account, obviously the YouTube, it's live streamed, and I switched and I didn't watch it on the app the last game. I watched it via the YouTube channel. I was kind of in the comments and sort of seeing what was going on. Mainly it was some grumpy Leicester City fans that were in there. But there was for me, a crazy thing going on with the viewing figures. It just didn't stop increasing. I made notes. It was 5K, 5.6K, 6K, 6.2K. And at the peak, just before half-time, before I switched back to the app because the stream was playing up, we were on 7,000 viewers, and that's just on one platform for a mid-Monday lunchtime under-23s game. And I know you could argue that some people are at home due to the horrible circumstances with COVID, and people have got working from home on their side. But one question I wanted to ask you is, what do you see the legacy being? Do you see when eventually Marcelo has to, move on, or he chooses to move on, with the youth side of things, do we see the legacy being that they will keep this renewed interest, that there will still be this massive fan base of the under 23s? Or do you see it more that the legacy might come in terms of philosophy and style of play? What do you think? What's your opinion on
The larger sort of view is that Bielsa has sort of implemented this style of play right the way down. So I think that there's been a bit of a reset at Thorpe Arch in the last few years, and a bit of a rethink about how they approach the academy. And we're seeing that now with the fact that they've invested in getting to Category 1 status. And then you see the way that they've sort of, I suppose this season that they're having at the moment, which is fantastic to watch. You're seeing all the youngsters score lots of goals, but I think the ultimate aim is to get to the highest possible level, so that you're competing at the highest possible level, so that you can attract the best youngsters in the country to your academy. You want to be playing the likes of Liverpool, Chelsea, Man U, just at academy level. So I think the larger legacy of Bielsa's initial impact is pretty long term, in that this is here to stay. I think the way that they've, as I think Tom mentioned it last week, to mention him again, should get like a Tom Bell or something.
penny in the swear jar?
Yeah, exactly. But like the way that you can't really you can judge them, but the professional development league is miles away from the level they're playing at now, for example, and would be, touch wood, if they get promoted and go to the first division of the Premier League 2, would be an absolute mile away from that. And it can't be overstated how important it is to have your players at first team level for a start. If Bielsa stays for another year or two, playing at a better level, that's not just running out for 30 minutes and playing on a ploughed field at Crewe Alexandra on a Monday afternoon in the nicest possible sense, because we've seen, like, Samu Saiz was playing in that game and it was completely pointless for him. But then you're seeing Tyler Roberts sort of play against, better academies this year. So I think it's long term. I think the commitment that the club have shown by investing into the academy has been brilliant. I think the way that Mark Jackson's dealing with bringing the under-18s through at the moment has been a huge step this year as well. So I don't see anything but positives, and I think I don't think you can say it's anything other than a long term, because the way they've invested, I think Bielsa's sort of come in, maybe it's been accelerated a little bit more, but I think Victor Orta has always had sort of an eye on developing the academy, because you want to see them look closer to home initially to see if you can. I mean, fans love big signings. We all want to see £50 million signings, but if Joe Gelhardt turns out to be what we all think he might be in 3-4 years, getting him for like nearly £1 million or less than £1 million initially from Wigan is a shrewd of business. All right, it's because of circumstance at Wigan, but he had plenty of choices and places to go. So I think the long-term view is that they want to make Thorpe Arch sort of just a production line of talent for choice. Obviously, we all know with the competitive nature of football that not everyone's going to make it at Leeds in the academy. It's only natural because of places. But if you can pick out the best of that talent coming through, then that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, we all love a 50 million signing, don't we? But we also all love a Calvin.
Yeah. You mentioned the kind of the production line at Thorpe Arch. Outside of the obvious ones, which one do you think is going to be the guy that's going to make it into the first team? Like, you've obviously got the Greenwoods and Gelhardts that are probably going to get a chance at least, but is there any sort of outside bets you'd put some money on?
It's difficult because obviously your mind would naturally go towards the obvious ones. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of Bobby Camwer, but he's just had such problems with injury that we just want to see him get a sort of consistent run, because he's sort of been someone who, since I joined him and sort of Charlie Creswell, when I first joined, I went to cover the under-18s. They were playing like a playoff game. I think it was against Charlton at Thorpe Arch, and I was asking people who'd watched them all season, who were they, because I'd not seen any of the lads before, just to ask about who was sort of the next best thing. And at 16, Charlie Cresswell, everyone was saying to me, watch Charlie Cresswell. He reads it so well, and he's 16. Then he was, he was a tower at that point, and I was 16. I mean, I'm quite a short lad, and he was double the size of me, and I'm like, wow, And you see him coming through now at the moment, and you just got to be patient with these kids at times. And he's, I mean, what's he, 18, 19 now? He's sort of touching on being a first team squad member, sort of not regularly, but when there's spots there. So I think Bobby Camwer, Charlie Cresswell, I suppose Cresswell's probably an obvious one, so I've sort of fallen into the trap there. I'm a big fan of Niall Huggins. He's sort of always goes under the radar, maybe because of the so-called big names that they've signed this summer. But I think he's got. I mean, if he needs to improve his shooting a little bit, but
just one goal this year.
But
it won last week, though.
He scored last week, yeah. But he's someone who's really, really good, and he's the kind of I suppose he sort of plays left back, doesn't he? But he's probably most, in terms of stature and sort of quickness and zippiness, he's probably most compared to like someone like Shackleton, the way that he moves about the pitch. And having that from left back is crucial, and he loves to get forward into the box, and he always gets in great positions, and that's the big thing. I think as long as you're getting in positions, eventually it'll sort of bear fruit for him. So Niall Huggins is certainly someone to watch, who maybe doesn't always get the sort of plaudits away from sort of the bigger lads.
It's interesting because we did one of the first one. Was it the third one we did? Was on Creswell, who I absolutely love, because I think he's going to be an absolute sensation. I hope. Not to put too much pressure on him. And you mentioned there about Niall Huggins. I put out a poll yesterday about who people would want us to cover next, and Niall Huggins has blown that poll out of the water. And I don't know whether that's to do with him scoring last week, but even before that, I think a lot of people have been talking about him as having the potential to come through. I think maybe because we have so many challenges in the first team at left back at the moment. As much as Alioski's doing a decent job, Dallas is sort of better there, but playing a different position. I think people are really crying out for a proper left back to break through, and Leif Davis is sort of feels closer to the first team, but also less likely to play. I'm not sure what's happening with him, but it's interesting. You mentioned as well about Bielsa and the impact he's had, but I'm so glad, and I'm a bit biased because I love the man, but you mentioned Jacko, Matt Jackson and the job he's done. It's easy to give credit to Bielsa for the way they're all playing. But Jacko's the one who has to bring it all together and make them play together, pick the team, deal with the chopping and changing of needing to put in the first team players. And I think he's done a sensational job this year. But I agree with you, that step up in level, if they go up, is going to be so goddamn hard because the academies at that Division 1 are just another level, aren't they?
Yeah, Blackburn is top of that table. It's weird.
They're in a situation where they're already where Leeds want to be. They're picking out the best talent that they can, and they've invested very heavily in it. So they've got squads that you're looking at going, where are they weak? Nowhere, that kind of thing. And like you say, you'll see. You do wonder if you'll start seeing more managers utilise the sort of under-23s as Bielsa has done. We've not particularly seen it on a regular basis so far. Maybe at this level, but I'm not sure sort of consistently in the level above how much that's done for. We saw for example, when Danny Drinkwater went viral a few weeks ago, it's a bit different, if you threw a 17-year-old at Spurs or whatever. But yeah, it'd be interesting.
What are the main differences between working with Phil and Graham? And if you would be, if you want to go as far as say which one you prefer to work with, obviously you don't have
to. What are the main differences? Graham's a lot more arsey.
I really enjoy Graham's incredibly dry sense of humour.
Yeah, no. To be honest, this is like a proper football answer, but they're both great in their own way. And I think that's the big thing that Graham did when he initially came in, because obviously we all know Leeds fans and social media and everything that brings. It's a sort of sink or swim for him.
And that was a hell of a job to take on.
Yeah. And he's done a good job in sort of making sure that he not copied Phil, but he's made himself slightly different, whilst obviously understanding the legacy that Phil leaves in the sort of Yorkshire Evening Post void when he left. So I love both of them in their own way. So I couldn't pick between them, to be honest.
No, that's fair.
I joke quite a cruel question, that Ross.
I joke quite a lot, saying that one's like my dad and one's like my new stepdad. So it's one of them. But
so which one
whose house do you go to on weekends?
Two
that's
Christmases,
it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, the 2 Christmas dinners every year.
I've got to ask you though, who wins that fight between Stan Collymore and Graham?
Graham's from Northern Ireland, so Graham.
Yeah,
that's my answer every time too. You don't mess with the Northern Irish, man. Never.
No, we can start calling him Leeds-born Graham Smyth, though, can't we?
Absolutely. We've just adopted everyone from Northern Ireland.
He's from the same part of Holbeck as Dallas, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Joe, because obviously this week's player profile, we do a player profile every week. We're doing Joe Gelhardt. We kind of wanted to do it because we've got the two Joes, yourself and him. And I just wondered what your opinions are of that man since he's joined.
Yeah, obviously, Leeds fans have hyped him up a fair bit. I think they played Stoke on the opening day, and that was his debut. And I think they got beat 4-0, but he was probably man of the match, which says everything about initially when he came in. Wigan, I think Wigan, the paper in Wigan is actually one of our sister papers. So I was speaking to the writer over there about him and coming through and how that is. And I actually gave Gregor Reich, and I apologise if I've pronounced his second name wrong. But he's the academy, I think he's the academy director at Wigan, who sort of had a huge development role in him bringing him through. And because he joined there at 10, and all you heard was like, he's the next Wayne Rooney. He scored 10 goals against Huddersfield in an academy game. But you want to sort of get a bit deeper than that and try and understand like what it like. It's obviously someone saying he's compared to Wayne Rooney is a great headline, but you actually want to know sort of like who he is, what's happening. And the Rooney comparisons you can see when he carries the ball. And the most thing that strikes me so far is that he doesn't even feel like he's flipped out of his sort of first or second gear yet at Leeds. You're seeing him on a weekly basis, still getting sort of integrated into the team even this long, and it still feels like, but he's starting to sort of strike up a decent partnership with Greenwood, and you can already see that he's had a little bit of Football League action, and I think Leeds are just being pretty sort of coy with him because they need to make sure that they don't rush him too quickly. Because I think also with the fans' expectations of him and the way that people have hyped him up a lot. Probably myself slightly guilty of that because sometimes I do sit and tweet about the under-23s and think like you almost forget like there are people actually reading the tweets at times, so but I've been mightily impressed. I keep saying to Graham, he's literally like that kid at school that you pass to and he just runs around 10 players and then round the left back again just for a laugh and then sticks in the top corner, and that's how he looks at the moment in the academy. So again, having just said not to hype him up, I think he might be a fairly special player in the near future.
Yeah, he was all over Sunderland last week. I mean, I don't suppose, I'm sure you Woks, no one's come out from the club, but any understanding of why he kind of seemed to disappear? He didn't play against Crawley, he wasn't playing for the under-23s. Do we know if he was ill or...?
It was match days 12 to 16 for the under-23s. He just wasn't in the squads, was he?
All right, nerd.
Statistician these days, Cookie. You're coming up with some in-depth knowledge each week. I need to step my game up.
I think he had an injury and then was absent for other reasons. Everyone else can make their own mind up with that. But yeah, I think seeing him back, obviously, you want to try and see him on a consistent basis, don't you, as much as possible. And like I mentioned, I think he played, 18 times in his breakout season at Wigan and scored against Hull and things like that. So I think he's really exciting. I think someone who we should all be excited about, but understand that he's got a bit of time to sort of develop into this system.
Yeah, a lot of pressure on young shoulders, isn't there? He is only 18.
Well, yeah, and the biggest shame about, and this is me being slightly selfish, in that I've only watched him once in the flesh since he joined Leeds, because obviously with all the restrictions, I went to Blackpool in the EFL Trophy, and he didn't have the greatest night that night, but I think in general they didn't have a great night. Which was a shame because they didn't really show. That was the first time in the EFL Trophy of the season where they put like a really strong side out. It felt like they could have a proper go, and they conceded really early, which sort of knocked their confidence quite a lot. But I mean, he had the best chance in that game. I think he got 1-on-1, and it's just that little bit of composure, that little bit of development, and that sort of just growing up that I think we'll probably see him. I think what is he still 18, nearly 19? Yeah. Been 19 yet, and I think you'll see him still fill out in the next few years, and you can see him already. He just jumps around people, he shrugs people off the ball.
He were all over Sunderland, weren't they? The amount of times he just walked round them, superb.
Yeah, there we go. We are out of time, unfortunately. Joe, do you want to pimp your socials or where people can find your writing?
No, because I don't want any. Thank you, though.
All right, no worries.
Joe Urquhart YEP or Joe Urquhart _ I think I am these days.
Brilliant.
God, you like to use an underscore. What's that about?
Well, I got rid of YEP in case I got sacked because I wanted to keep my blue tick. So that's just being brutally honest.
I love it. Bloody hell.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cookie. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much.
Later in the week with another podcast all about the youth team. So until then, see ya.
Most of our stats come from LUFC Stats or LUFC Data on Twitter. A very special thanks to Barney Stewart, Cook, Ewan and Howard Metcalf, Josh Pearson, Laura, Leon and Rob, The Light Show, and all our family and friends.